Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is.
Why in the world would Apple Computer want to jump into the handset market with so much competition?
We use all the handsets out there. It's really frustrating. It's a category that needs to be reinvented.
Imagine walking into a store where people willingly wait in line for hours just to buy a product they've never even touched before. Imagine a company so powerful that every product launch becomes global news. Every design choice sparks endless debates, and every logo is recognized in nearly every corner of the world. Today, Apple is worth trillions of dollars. It sells hundreds of millions of devices every year and has become one of the most influential companies in human history. But the story of Apple isn't just about technology. It's about obsession, failure, impossible comebacks, relentless innovation, and one man's vision that changed the world forever. Long before Apple became the giant we know today, computers were intimidating machines locked away inside universities, government facilities, and giant corporations. Ordinary people had little reason to believe they would ever own one. In the early 1970s, the idea of having a computer sitting on a kitchen table seemed almost ridiculous. Computers were expensive, complicated, and designed for experts, not families. At the same time, a young man named Steve Jobs was growing up in California. Adopted shortly after birth, Jobs was curious about everything. He questioned authority, challenged traditional thinking, and became fascinated with electronics. His close friend, Steve Wozniak, was almost the opposite. Quiet, humble, and incredibly gifted as an engineer, Wozniak could design electronic circuits that amazed everyone around him. Together, they formed one of the most unlikely partnerships in business history. Before Apple even existed, Jobs and Wozniak built something called the Blue Box, a small electronic device that allowed users to make free long-distance telephone calls by manipulating the phone system. It wasn't exactly legal, but it taught them something incredibly important. They realized that two young people working together could build a product that people actually wanted to buy. That experience planted the seed for something much bigger. In 1976, inside the garage of Jobs' parents' house in Los Altos, California, Apple Computer was officially born. Contrary to popular belief, the garage wasn't where every computer was built, but it became the symbol of humble beginnings and entrepreneurial ambition. The company's first product was the Apple I, a computer designed almost entirely by Steve Wozniak. Unlike many competing kits that required users to assemble nearly everything themselves, the Apple I came with an assembled motherboard, making it much easier for hobbyists to use. The Apple I wasn't a massive commercial success by today's standards, but it accomplished something far more important. It proved that there was a real market for personal computers. Investors started paying attention. Retailers became interested. More importantly, Steve Jobs saw a future that almost nobody else could see. Jobs believed computers shouldn't just be functional. They should be beautiful. They should be simple. They should feel friendly rather than intimidating. This philosophy would eventually become Apple's greatest competitive advantage. The following year, Apple introduced the Apple II, one of the first highly successful mass-produced personal computers. Unlike its predecessor, it came with a plastic case, color graphics, and an easy-to-use design that appealed not only to engineers, but also to schools, businesses, and families. Sales exploded. Apple transformed almost overnight from a tiny startup into one of the fastest-growing companies in America. By 1980, Apple had become so successful that it launched one of the biggest initial public offerings in history. Overnight, hundreds of employees became millionaires. Steve Jobs was only 25 years old, yet he had already become one of the wealthiest young entrepreneurs in the world. But enormous success often brings enormous pressure. As IBM entered the personal computer market, competition intensified dramatically. IBM possessed resources, reputation, and corporate relationships that Apple simply couldn't match. Many experts believed Apple's best days were already behind it. Jobs refused to accept that. He became obsessed with building a revolutionary computer that would completely redefine personal computing. That project eventually became the Macintosh. The Macintosh wasn't simply another computer, it represented a completely different philosophy. Instead of requiring users to type complicated commands, it introduced a graphical user interface controlled by a mouse. Windows, icons, folders, and simple visual navigation suddenly made computers accessible to ordinary people. Many of these ideas had been explored at Xerox PARC, but Apple transformed them into a polished consumer product that ordinary people could actually buy. To introduce the Macintosh, Apple created one of the most famous advertisements ever produced. During the 1984 Super Bowl, millions of viewers watched a dramatic commercial inspired by George Orwell's novel, 1984. The message was clear. Apple wasn't just selling computers, it was fighting conformity. It was challenging the status quo. It positioned itself as the company for dreamers, creators, rebels, and innovators. The commercial became legendary before most people had even seen the product itself. Marketing had become as important as engineering, and Steve Jobs understood that better than almost anyone. But behind the scenes, serious problems were developing. The Macintosh was innovative, but it was also expensive and limited by the hardware available at the time. Sales failed to meet the enormous expectations created by Apple's marketing campaign. Internal tensions grew rapidly. Steve Jobs demanded perfection from everyone around him. He inspired employees to accomplish things they thought were impossible, but he could also be extraordinarily difficult to work with. His relentless pursuit of excellence often created conflict inside the company. Eventually, those conflicts reached a breaking point. Apple's board sided with CEO John Sculley, a former Pepsi executive whom Jobs himself had recruited with the famous challenge. Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world? In 1985, only 9 years after co-founding Apple, Steve Jobs was effectively forced out of the company he had created. For most entrepreneurs, that would have been the end of the story. Losing control of the company that defined your identity is a devastating blow. Many people expected Jobs to disappear from the technology industry forever. Instead, he started over. Jobs founded a new computer company called Next. While Next computers never achieved massive commercial success, they introduced advanced software technologies that would later become critically important. At nearly the same time, Jobs purchased a small graphics division from Lucasfilm. That company eventually became Pixar. At first, Pixar struggled financially. Years passed with little commercial success, but everything changed when the company partnered with Disney to create the world's first fully computer-animated feature film, Toy Story. Released in 1995, Toy Story became a global phenomenon. Pixar instantly became one of Hollywood's most valuable animation studios, proving once again that Steve Jobs possessed an extraordinary ability to recognize revolutionary ideas long before everyone else. Meanwhile, Apple was facing a crisis. Throughout the early 1990s, Apple released too many confusing products, struggled against Microsoft's rapidly growing Windows operating system, and lost market share year after year. Innovation slowed. Financial losses mounted. Analysts openly questioned whether Apple could survive at all. Ironically, the company that had fired Steve Jobs now desperately needed him back. In 1996, Apple acquired Next, primarily for its advanced software. Along with the acquisition came Steve Jobs. At first, Jobs served only as an advisor, but it quickly became obvious that stronger leadership was needed. Within months, Jobs had effectively taken control of Apple once again. Few business comebacks in history have ever matched what happened next. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, the company was only weeks away from running out of cash. Critics believed bankruptcy was inevitable. Employees were demoralized, investors had lost confidence, and Apple's product lineup had become a confusing maze of dozens of computers that even its own salespeople struggled to explain. Jobs immediately realized that Apple didn't have a technology problem, it had a focus problem. One of the first things he did was gather the company's executives into a conference room and ask a simple question. Which products should exist? No one could give a clear answer. So Jobs walked to a whiteboard and drew a simple grid with just 4 boxes: consumer desktop, consumer portable, professional desktop, professional portable. He crossed out almost everything else. Overnight, dozens of projects were canceled. Thousands of hours of engineering work disappeared. It was painful, but it gave Apple something it had lost: clarity. Jobs believed that saying no was just as important as saying yes. Every unnecessary feature, every confusing product, and every distraction prevented Apple from creating something truly exceptional. This philosophy became one of the defining characteristics of the company. To restore confidence, Apple also made one of the most surprising business moves in technology history. At the 1997 Macworld Conference, Steve Jobs announced that Microsoft would invest $150 million in Apple. The audience booed as Bill Gates appeared on a giant screen behind Jobs. For years, Apple and Microsoft had been fierce rivals. Yet Jobs understood something many people didn't. Apple didn't need Microsoft to lose. Apple simply needed Apple to survive. The investment wasn't huge by Microsoft's standards, but psychologically, it changed everything. Investors suddenly believed Apple might actually have a future. The next breakthrough arrived in 1998 with the launch of the iMac. Unlike the dull beige computers dominating the market, the iMac was colorful, playful, and instantly recognizable. It looked more like a piece of modern art than a traditional computer. Many people laughed at its unusual design. Others criticized Apple's decision to remove the floppy disk drive, a standard feature on nearly every computer at the time. But Jobs believed the future belonged to faster technologies, not outdated ones. Once again, Apple ignored conventional wisdom. The gamble worked. Millions of iMacs were sold, and Apple returned to profitability. For the first time in years, customers were genuinely excited about buying an Apple product. But Steve Jobs wasn't satisfied. He understood that computers alone would never make Apple one of the world's most valuable companies. He saw another revolution approaching. By the early 2000s, digital music was exploding. People were downloading songs from the internet, carrying bulky CD players, and struggling to organize thousands of music files. Existing MP3 players were difficult to use and offered poor user experiences. Apple saw an opportunity. In 2001, the company introduced the iPod. At first glance, it looked simple: a clean white design, a scroll wheel, and enough storage for 1,000 songs in your pocket. But the real innovation wasn't just the hardware. It was the complete ecosystem surrounding it. Apple later introduced iTunes, allowing users to legally purchase individual songs instead of entire albums. Record labels were skeptical. Many believed digital music would destroy their business. Jobs convinced them that offering consumers an easy, affordable, and legal option was better than allowing piracy to dominate forever. Consumers loved it. The famous advertising campaign featuring dancing silhouettes wearing white earbuds became one of the most recognizable marketing campaigns of the decade. Soon, those white earbuds became status symbols. Seeing someone wearing them instantly communicated that they owned an iPod. Within just a few years, Apple wasn't merely a computer company anymore. It had become a major force in the music industry. Then came the product that changed everything. In January 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage wearing his signature black turtleneck, blue jeans, and sneakers. Millions watched as he announced 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communication device. The audience applauded after each announcement. Then Jobs smiled. "Are you getting it?" he asked. "These are not three separate devices. This is one device." The iPhone had arrived. At the time, most smartphones had physical keyboards, tiny screens, and complicated software designed primarily for business users. Companies like Nokia, BlackBerry, and Motorola dominated the market. Industry experts questioned whether Apple had entered too late. But the iPhone wasn't trying to improve existing phones. It completely reimagined what a phone could be. Instead of tiny plastic buttons, users interacted directly with a large multi-touch display. Instead of navigating confusing menus, they simply touched what they wanted. Browsing the internet finally felt natural. Photos looked beautiful. Watching videos became enjoyable. Software updates introduced entirely new capabilities without requiring customers to buy new hardware. The following year, Apple launched the App Store. That decision transformed the iPhone from a product into a platform. Developers from around the world suddenly had the ability to create applications for millions of customers. Businesses that didn't even exist yet would eventually become billion-dollar companies thanks to Apple's ecosystem. Ride-sharing, food delivery, mobile banking, fitness tracking, video editing, language learning, and countless other industries were reshaped because of one decision: allowing third-party developers to build apps. The App Store created an entirely new digital economy. Competitors scrambled to respond. Google accelerated Android development. Samsung invested heavily in smartphones. Microsoft attempted to reinvent Windows for mobile devices. BlackBerry struggled to adapt. Nokia fell behind. Entire industries changed almost overnight. Apple wasn't simply participating in the smartphone revolution, it was leading it. Then another challenge appeared. Many investors believed Apple depended too heavily on Steve Jobs himself. His vision, presentations, and product instincts seemed impossible to replace. Sadly, those concerns became painfully real. In 2004, Jobs had been diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. Although he initially continued leading Apple, his health gradually declined over the following years. Despite multiple surgeries and treatments, he remained deeply involved in Apple's product development. Even while visibly thinner during keynote presentations, he continued unveiling products that would shape the future of technology. In August 2011, Steve Jobs resigned as CEO, recommending Tim Cook as his successor. Just weeks later, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The news shocked the world. People gathered outside Apple stores, leaving flowers, handwritten letters, candles, and bitten apples as tributes. Leaders from governments, technology companies, and creative industries praised Jobs for changing not only computers, but modern life itself. Many believed Apple would never be the same again. Yet under Tim Cook's leadership, Apple entered another extraordinary chapter. Instead of trying to become another Steve Jobs, Cook focused on operational excellence, global expansion, environmental initiatives, and services. Apple introduced products such as the Apple Watch, AirPods, powerful custom-designed chips, and subscription services including Apple Music, Apple TV+, iCloud+, and Apple Arcade. The company also invested heavily in privacy, making it one of its strongest selling points at a time when concerns over personal data were growing worldwide. Perhaps Apple's greatest strength today isn't any single product, it's the ecosystem. Once someone owns an iPhone, adding an Apple Watch feels seamless. AirPods connect instantly. A MacBook syncs files automatically through iCloud. Photos appear across every device. Messages continue effortlessly from phone to laptop. Each product makes the others even more valuable, creating an experience that competitors still struggle to replicate. This interconnected ecosystem generates remarkable customer loyalty. Millions of people upgrade to new Apple devices every few years, not simply because of new features, but because leaving the ecosystem becomes increasingly difficult. Apple also became one of the world's largest services companies. App Store commissions, subscriptions, warranties, cloud storage, payment services, and digital entertainment now generate tens of billions of dollars in recurring revenue every year. That diversification has made Apple's business stronger than ever. Today, Apple is far more than a technology manufacturer. It influences entertainment, healthcare, education, finance, communication, and even filmmaking. Entire industries watch Apple's announcements because one product decision can reshape consumer expectations across the globe. The company has faced criticism over manufacturing practices, App Store policies, repair restrictions, pricing, and competition. Like every global corporation, Apple continues facing difficult questions about regulation, innovation, and its future direction. Yet despite those challenges, its impact on the modern world is undeniable. From a small garage in California to becoming one of the most valuable companies in history, Apple's journey demonstrates that revolutionary ideas rarely begin with unlimited resources. They begin with an obsession to build something better than what already exists. Steve Jobs once said that the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who actually do. Whether you admire Apple or criticize it, one fact remains impossible to ignore. Every time you unlock a smartphone, download an app, stream music, pay with your phone, or expect technology to be both powerful and beautifully designed, you're experiencing a world that Apple helped create. And perhaps that's the company's greatest achievement, not simply building incredible products, but permanently changing what billions of people expect technology to be.